I'm Paul Foote.
And I'm Jeremy Hardy.
And we're here to celebrate what is perhaps our most popular national institution, the National Health Service.
And yet, without wishing to be too emotive, the NHS is beset on all sides by loathsome blood-sucking parasites. In the interest of balance, I should point out that the views expressed by Paul and me are the views of all right-thinking people.
Join us and Linda Smith for the next half hour.
Our National Health Service may not be the envy of the world, but it's certainly the envy of all the countries who don't have one. And most people in Britain have very great affection for it. It's because it's driven by the criterion of need rather than money that it is so successful and so popular. Private hospitals might treat 800,000 people a year, but the NHS treats about 11 million, and 99% of babies are born in NHS hospitals. But here's the curious thing. While everyone, apart from those who are beyond the help of even the NHS, agrees it works better because it's a public service, all sorts of people are beavering away to replace the principle of treating people according to need, which works, with the principle of the marketplace, which doesn't. Tonight we're going to have a look at some of those efforts.
The most topical example is something called the Private Finance Initiative. Under this system, the prime sites of old NHS hospitals are flogged off to bankers and builders who develop them for profit. Then the same bankers and builders build new hospitals, which they own, and rent out to the NHS, also to profit. This ingenious scheme was worked out by a committee set up by the Conservative government, a leading member of which was this man.
Malcolm Bates, Deputy Managing Director of the telecommunications, defence and electronics giant General Electric.
At first, the PFI idea didn't go down very well with some leaders of the Labour Party. Harriet Harman, who spoke for the party on health, was outraged. In the spring of 1996, she said,
"When the private sector is building, owning, managing and running a hospital, it has been privatised."
Who could argue with that? Well, the Labour government did. When it came to office, an experienced businessman was brought in to advise them on PFI. He was
Malcolm Bates.
Once again, Bates came down firmly on the side of PFI. The government gave the go-ahead for a string of PFI hospitals. The biggest was the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh, to be built by a consortium headed by BICC, whose board was joined soon afterwards by a new director.
Malcolm Bates.
Not everyone rejoiced, certainly not the secretary of the Scottish BMA, Dr. Brian Potter.
We're selling the silver, the family silver of the National Health Service. So in Edinburgh we've got the City Hospital site, which is prime site for building houses. We've got the Princess Margaret Rose site, prime site for building houses, many houses. The Eastern General site, the Astley Ainsley Hospital site, and of course there's the Royal Infirmary itself. Naturally,
the men in charge of the health service in Edinburgh take a different view. OK, well, we've got here two chief executives, very important people. Joe Innes is the chief executive of the Royal Edinburgh Infirmary NHS Trust, and Trevor Jones is the chief executive of the Lothian Board, which is the hospital, National Health Service Authority, which runs a hospital.
I think it's a very exciting option. I think it gives benefits to the NHS that they could only dream about in the past. And from my point of view, I think it gives the NHS the ability to regenerate its asset base in a way that it could never have imagined 5 years ago.
We're not transferring any control. We're producing a situation where we will have the newest, brand new greenfield site teaching hospital in Europe.
Not transferring any control? Well, they definitely are transferring control over at least a third of their workforce. I went down to the new hospital site in Edinburgh with occupational therapist and union secretary at the Royal, Kirstin Hay.
The banks put up the money for the hospital. They design it, build it, own it, and they run a number of the services within it. This means that health service staff will be handed over to private contractors who have a miserable track record in dealing with NHS staff.
All clinical services will be run by the NHS. The hotel and maintenance services will be run by the private consortia.
Hired and fired by them?
Hired and fired by them.
Is there any condition that, for instance, their union should remain intact?
There is, within the transfer of undertakings, the stipulated legislation, those rules transfer them under existing terms and conditions.
That's something to do with the trade union.
I'm not clear. I'm not sure I could answer that.
Mr. Owens and Mr. Jones were absolutely clear that the new PFI hospital will be cheaper than a new NHS hospital built under the old rules. The proof, they say, is this 300-page document, hot off the presses this week and suitably censored to take out commercially confidential information. The full business case for PFI. The crucial table which compares public and private building costs is on page 46.
BSC forecast.
That's the public cost.
£20,670,000. PFI forecast.
That's the private cost.
£20,001,000.
So, in exchange for handing over all those development sites and the ownership of the new hospital to private companies, the total annual saving is a measly £699,000. But wait, let's look at that table again. The PFI forecast assumes
A 5-year construction.
but the public sector forecast assumes
An 8-year construction.
obviously, if you build a hospital over 5 years, it'll cost less than if you build it over 8 years. So the real comparison would be between 5-year building and 5-year building. What a relief. The table has that comparison. Here we are.
Public sector forecast 5-year construction annual charge.
Yes, get on with it.
NA.
NA? What does that mean? According to the Trust, it means not applicable, because the government won't lend the money for a 5-year build. But government rules can, of course, be changed, and the point is, how much would it cost to build a public hospital over 5 years? The Trust admitted they haven't done the sums, so we have. We asked a researcher at the Department of Public Health Sciences at St George's Hospital Medical School to work out what the figure would be, and here's the answer.
£14 million.
That's £6 million a year less than the PFI figure. Every year for 15 years. This exciting PFI initiative was summed up very well by the Scottish Secretary of Unison, John Lambie.
I fail to understand government ministers. I'm a member of the Scottish Executive of the Labour Party and have argued against PFI. Perhaps the easiest way to analyse PFI is that you build now, you pay later, and you pay much, much more, but you never own the assets.
I've been looking at the Queen's Birthday Honours list this month, and John Lambie's not on it. But here's a name that did catch my eye.
Alexander Fraser Morrison.
Sir Alexander, if you don't mind. He's the chairman of Morrison's, a big construction company which is part of the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary PFI consortium. And here's this chap again.
Malcolm Bates.
Sir Malcolm, if you don't mind. You remember him? He's a director of BICC, also part of the consortium, and he's the chap who advised both Tory and Labour governments about the glories of PFI.
Another side effect of PFIs is bed cuts. The new Edinburgh hospital will have fewer beds than the old one, so will most PFI hospitals. The Marlborough and Swindon PFI scheme came up with a creative way round this problem. They have redefined a bed as a care space. And a care space can be this.
A reclining chair.
This.
A couch.
Or this.
A trolley.
Just a quick item here. This is the 1992 election address of Alan Milburn, who's now Junior Health Minister. Labour will end eye and dental charges and will stop the rise in prescription charges. Now, they've kept eye and dental charges the same and put them up, but it's nice to know what they would have done if they'd won the election in 1992.
Everyone knows that if you want good executives, you have to pay them lots of money, and the modern health service is no exception. Here's an example. Averil Dongworth was chief executive at Luton and Dunstable NHS Trust, salary £50,000. A consultant there, John Spencer, disagreed with her management style. He came back from holiday one day to find a mysterious wire underneath his desk. He traced the wire to a hole in the wall. It contained a tape recorder which was bugging his phone. He called the police, who traced the bugging to the chief executive's office. Meanwhile, Spencer was suspended, wrongly accused of taking a backhander. There was an overwhelming vote of no confidence in Miss Dongworth, and she moved on. The chairman mourned her departure.
There are not enough people in the service of her calibre.
Where is she now? She's Acting Chief Executive of City and Hackney Community Services NHS Trust with a salary of £77,000.
You may be surprised to hear that a third of all private hospitals enjoy charitable status, which means they pay no tax on their large surpluses and get 80% relief on the business rate. A private hospital might not seem like a charity in the usual sense. One can't imagine Oxfam going to a famine zone and opening an expensive restaurant, for example. But a private hospital can have charitable status provided that it's open to all customers and not just members of insurance plans like Bupa and PPA. But don't worry about the health insurers. They're making huge profits, also assisted by the taxpayer. The Exchequer encourages us to take out private health insurance by making it tax deductible. Add that figure to the tax relief private hospitals are getting, and the taxpayer is subsidising private health to the tune of £120 million a year. But with all the tax breaks, people argue that private health takes the pressure off the state. That must be why the Conservatives presided over a 73% increase in private hospital beds, while a third of NHS beds were cut. So the private sector now has plenty of beds, so many in fact that half of them are empty. So since there is this massive overcapacity in the private sector, we thought we should drum up some customers for them. Now I've got all the bump here from one of the top private hospitals, and certainly one which enjoys charitable status, the London Clinic in central London. Now here we've got the waiting room. Now the magazine here is Country Life, no rubbish. And if we look at the accommodation section here, in addition to carpets, fridges, televisions and ensuite bathrooms in all of its 131 rooms, excellent catering, also the coffee shop with waitress service, the hospital also boasts medical care. And the care is probably excellent because most of the staff were trained by public sector teaching hospitals and most of the consultants are still employed by the NHS. And they're all in here. This is the brochure of consultants and specialists. All the big NHS names are in here, Bart's and Tommy's and the Royal Free and so forth. Clinic is very proud of all these hard-working consultants. Now, the clinic's founding charter pledges that it will provide medical care
gratuitously or otherwise.
Let's assume that by gratuitously they mean not needlessly but freely, and let's look at the free care they provide. Well, last year the hospital treated well over 15,000 patients, of whom 22 were treated gratuitously. All the others were treated otherwise. But with great taste and decency, settlement of account is the last thing on the back page of the brochure. Medical plans like Bupa, PPA, Norwich Union are all accepted here. Or if you're not covered, there's no problem. You can just pay. They accept Switch, Diners, MasterCard, Visa, American Express. It doesn't say anything about Sainsbury's reward cards or AA Relay. But what intrigues me is this little statement here.
The London Clinic reserves the right to insist on deposits from certain embassies.
So I think we need to know which foreign diplomats are bad payers or suspected of espionage and likely to be expelled before they settle their account. Anyway, it certainly seems a very accessible hospital. You can actually get to it by tube, as if. And it looks absolutely lovely place to stay, right in the centre of London there, and the tariffs are between £360 and £460 a night. Fairly standard for a West End hospital. Seems a bit steep. You can, after all, get a deluxe single at the Dorchester for £250 plus VAT, but you get full board in a Hossie, so it all sort of evens out, really. So you might want to go to the London Clinic just for a weekend break and not even have an operation, and maybe that's something the homeless should consider. Now, I could tell you what's coming up in part 2, but I'm not going to, because I want to tease and tantalise one Joe McRae, who is Health Secretary Frank Dobson's spin doctor. Mr McRae rang our producer to find out what kind of programme we were making. Then he said,
I assume you will be showing it to us before it goes out.
So, because of Joe's over-curiosity, I'm afraid everyone's going to have to suffer. More things after the break. Welcome back. Now, we didn't watch the commercials, so we don't know which, if any, health insurance companies advertised during the break.
But I bet Joe McRae does.
I bet he does. Now, in case you thought this programme hadn't already reached a fever pitch of excitement, Paul's got a story about computer codes.
No, it's not. It's about a brick wall.
All right, go on.
Not long ago, Alan Langlands, chief executive of the NHS, went down to the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee, where Alan Williams MP asked him an unusual question.
Mr. Langland, if you saw someone walk into a brick wall, pick themselves up and walk into that same brick wall again, would the thought perhaps cross your mind that they might either be drunk or of unsound mind?
I think it would be surprising if someone did it twice, yes.
But you did. Not you personally.
What could he mean? The first brick wall, he explained, was in 1984 in Wessex. The computer consultants to the regional health authority there were
Anderson Consulting.
They advised the health authority what sort of computer system they needed and how to put the contract out to tender. A short list of suitable companies was drawn up, and the winner was
Anderson Consulting.
The House of Commons Public Accounts Committee was not impressed. They said,
"It is clearly wrong for somebody who is tendering for NHS business to also be advising the NHS as their consultant."
Anyway, Anderson Consulting and their partners, IBM, made a frightful mess of the computer contract, and by 1990, when the project was mercifully abandoned, £20 million of NHS money had gone down the drain. Dazed by this brick wall, the NHS executive picked itself up and had another go, this time with a hospital computer integration system called HIS. This system wasn't a resounding success either. Another 106 million of NHS payouts to private computer companies went down the drain. Bloodied but unbowed, the NHS executive tried again. The lucky beneficiary this time was an enterprising general practitioner.
Dr. James Reed.
Dr. Reed had developed a system for coding clinical information on computers. Dazzled, the NHS bought the whole system, called the Reed Codes, for £1.25 million. To develop the codes, a whole new NHS department was established, the Centre for Coding and Classification, in Woodgate, Loughborough. The centre's first director, at an annual salary of £60,000, was
Dr. James Reed.
Who was to distribute the codes? The NHS gave a complete monopoly and £11 million to a little-known company called Computer Aided Medical Systems, whose offices were across the road from the centre, in Woodgate, Loughborough. The chairman was, here he is again,
Dr. James Reed.
Dr. Reed became very rich. At last he could indulge his lifelong passion for interior decoration. His kitchen became a zodiac room. His conservatory was inspired by Cleopatra's desert tent, and his hall was modelled on the ballroom of the Titanic. This was very appropriate because the story of the Titanic became increasingly relevant to the progress of the Reed Codes. In 1994, the NHS announced that the codes are fully ready for use. They weren't. 8 years from the start of the project and £19 million in development costs later, the codes aren't still fully ready for use. The NHS executive are so delighted with them that they plan to force hospitals to use them, said a spokesman.
The Reed Codes are alive and well.
Here's an extraordinary thing. The Queen's Birthday Honours List again. And another name leaps out at me.
Alan Langlands.
That's Sir Alan Langlands, if you don't mind. And that's the chap who kept walking into the brick wall.
Every year, the NHS spends 12% of its budget on drugs. That's £4.3 billion. It needn't be that high. Money's being wasted on branded drugs where generic drugs will be just as good. For example, a course of this drug, amoxicillin, costs about £5. The branded equivalent, Amoxil, costs £38.52, and you don't even get air miles with it. Amoxil is made by SmithKline Beecham, who last year had pre-tax profits of £1.7 billion. That's double their research and development budget. One of their directors received fees, bonuses and stock of £2.4 million. Another got £2.2 million, while a third poor wretch had to scrape by on a paltry £1.3 million, which is, I believe, well below the legal minimum wage. To find out how the NHS could spend more on us and less on these characters, I asked doctors at a GP's forum if they knew the price of a course of amoxil.
About £15, I would think.
Not even warm there. You think it's about £13? You're not even close. Up a bit.
20? 25?
And the rest. I'm so sorry.
You tell me.
It's £38.52.
That's outrageous.
So why do you think some GPs do prescribe so many branded drugs?
I think there's a huge amount of publicity that goes into selling drugs.
The trade names are generally shorter and made easier to remember. And yes, there is advertising pressure.
Then when the patent runs out and they start to be produced generically, people still have that trade name in their minds.
So doctors are just like the rest of us, and the most advertised brand is the one that's in our mind.
That's the risk. Advertising works.
Here's 5 jolly fellows sharing a joke. Judging from their salaries, you'd thought they could have afforded one each. They're the men in charge at Ernst & Young, one of Britain's big 6 accountants. Ernst & Young act for lots of the new NHS Trusts, and last year they came up with a cunning but legal wheeze for avoiding VAT. Like other businesses, NHS Trusts have to pay VAT on any equipment they buy. No need, said Ernst & Young. Here's what you do. Buy the equipment and lease it immediately to a firm in Guernsey where there's no VAT. The Guernsey firm then leases it back to the trust. All last year, Mr. B.J. Withy, Senior VAT Manager at Ernst & Young, lobbied NHS Trusts to persuade them of the genius of his scheme. He circulated this document.
NHS Structure 2, Offshore Lease and Leaseback Costings.
At the top, it says purchase of equipment, £1 million. Go down to the Guernsey rigmarole, and at the bottom, here are the net savings of £127,000. And don't forget this item, E&Y, which is Ernst & Young, of course. Fee, £14,128. What a bonanza. Some trusts were a little worried about indirectly fiddling the taxpayer, who they argued paid for the NHS in the first place, but lots of trusts went for it. Their celebrations were spoiled when the scheme was leaked last September. The government were not amused. In January, a letter went out to all the trusts from the NHS executive declaring that the tax dodge was
unacceptable
and ordering the trusts to
disengage from such activities at the earliest opportunity and not to renew such contracts.
How many trusts had gone for the dodge, and how much good NHS money was thrown into the coffers of Ernst & Young without any advantage to the health service? The answer we got from the NHS was illuminating.
We don't know. No investigation was carried out.
More and more often, the health service recruits its top people from the cream of private industry. Here's an example. Alan Lovell was chief executive of Condors, a building company. He carried out a rationalisation programme in which 1,800 workers were sacked, but the company still went under in 1992. In 1993, he became chief executive of Costain, another building company. In 1995, he got a 28% pay rise, but the company made a loss of £143 million. In 1996, Mr. Lovell left with a payoff of £360,000. Where is he now? He's a non-executive director of the Winchester and Eastleigh Healthcare Trust.
Now, we've looked at some of the problems of the health service. Obviously, the government can't tell independent drug companies, computer firms and private hospitals what to do. They're in the private sector and can't be dictated to. So we'll have to nationalise them. Now, you might say that would amount to the seizure of private assets, but that was exactly the argument against the founding of the health service in the first place. So it's good night from me, Jeremy Hardy.
And from me, Paul Foote.
And from me, Linda Smith.
And finally, to those people who say, why should I pay my taxes to the NHS if I don't use it? The answer is, shut your face or we'll take the rest of your money.